The dust in Providence had a way of getting into your soul. It was 1878, and for Esther Weston, that dust was the taste of every meal, the fog on every window, the color of every last one of her dead dreams. She was an orphan, a ghost haunting the house of Reverend Blackwood, the man who'd taken her in not out of kindness, but for the free labor. Her life was a metronome of misery. Wake before the sun, stoke the fire, fetch the water, scrub the floors, disappear. She was a shadow, noticed only when she made a mistake. The Reverend's wife, Martha, spoke with pointed glares. The Reverend himself only spoke to quote scripture about the sins of being lazy, his voice like grinding stones. Esther learned early on the secret to survival in that house. Make yourself small. Make yourself invisible. Pray the day ends. But the nights were worse. Lying on a straw mattress in the attic, the wind would cry around the house, and it sounded just like the emptiness in her own chest. She'd remember her mother's smile, her father's laugh, back when they dreamed of having their own land. Providence was where that dream and her parents came to be buried in unmarked graves. For Esther, it was a tomb she had to live in. To the rest of the town, she was just a walking reminder that out here, on the edge of everything, hope dies first. Then one day, something different happened. It wasn't a gunshot or a fire. It was a quiet crack in the endless routine. At the very edge of town, where the street gave up and became prairie, an Apache family stood, a man, a woman, and a small child, their pony so tired it looked like it was made of sticks. They weren't warriors. They were just hungry. You could see it in their bones. The man, Lonan, stood tall, but his pride was a thin shirt against the cold wind of exhaustion. The woman, Kia, held their son, her eyes scanning the faces of the townspeople, looking for a kindness that wasn't there. The town's reaction was as fast and cold as a winter snake. Doors slammed shut. Curtains were drawn. Mr. Donovan from the general store came out with a shotgun, not pointing it, just holding it. He didn't have to. He spat tobacco juice in the dust, and the message was clear. Get out. Reverend Blackwood saw the whole thing. He stood on the porch of the rectory, his face a mask of stern disapproval. He didn't see a family starving. He saw a test, a temptation for his flock, and he expected them to fail it by showing mercy. Esther watched from the rectory window, a silver spoon in her hand that she was supposed to be polishing. She saw the little boy, no older than 5, his head lolling against his mother's shoulder. She saw the cracks in the woman's lips. She saw the desperate fire in the man's eyes. And something inside her, something she had buried deep down just to survive, broke loose. It was a raw, aching pity. They were hungry. It was that simple, that terrible. She knew what would happen if she helped them. She knew the price of breaking the town's unwritten law. But the image of that child's face wouldn't let her go. That night, her hands shook as she served the Reverend and his wife their supper. Roasted chicken, potatoes, more food than she'd see in 3 days. As she cleared their plates, a decision hardened in her heart. She wrapped up what was left, half a loaf of bread, 2 potatoes, a thick slice of salted pork. It was a fortune. Under a sky with no moon and no stars, she slipped out the back door. Her heart felt like a wild drum against her ribs. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of a floorboard sounded like an accusation. She kept to the shadows, a ghost on a mission, the bundle of food clutched in her hand like a prayer. The family was still there, a dark shape against the endless horizon. They hadn't been driven off. They'd just been ignored, erased by the town's silent cruelty. As she got closer, the man, Lonan, was on his feet in an instant, his hand on the knife at his belt. He looked like a cornered wolf, ready to die for his family. Esther froze. She held out the bundle. For you, she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. For the child. The woman, Kia, looked from Esther's face to the bundle, then back again. Disbelief warred with a weariness so deep it was frightening. She murmured something in her own language, and the tension in the man's shoulders eased just a little. But his eyes never left Esther, searching for the trick. Esther took one more slow step, placed the food on the ground, and backed away, showing her empty hands. She meant no harm. Kia knelt, her movements slow, as if she was afraid it was a dream. She unwrapped the cloth. When she saw the food, a sound escaped her, half sob, half sigh of relief. She immediately broke off a piece of bread and gave it to her son. The boy ate like he'd forgotten how, a desperate, frantic hunger that made Esther's throat close up. Then Kia looked up at Esther. And in her dark eyes, there was a gratitude so powerful, so pure, it felt like a physical touch. In that one look, Esther felt more seen, more human, than she had in the 5 years she'd been in Providence. Lonan ate too, his gaze still fixed on her, but the suspicion was melting away, replaced by a grudging respect. Esther didn't stay. She just gave a quick jerky nod and slipped back into the darkness. She fled back to the rectory, her heart still pounding, but for a different reason now. It was the thrill of her rebellion, the warmth of that woman's grateful eyes. She thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought no one had seen. But she was wrong. From a darkened window in the saloon across the street, a pair of eyes had watched the whole thing. Walter Prescott. A man who fed on the misery of others the way a vulture feeds on the dead. He saw her give them the food. He saw them eat it. And a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He knew exactly what this meant. It meant trouble. And trouble was his favorite kind of entertainment. The next morning was coming, and with it a reckoning. The summons came before the sun was even up. Miss Weston. Reverend Blackwood's voice cut through the cold air of his study. Come in. The room felt like a tomb, and standing by the fireplace, a smug grin on his face, was Walter Prescott. Esther's blood turned to ice. She couldn't look at him. She just stood there, her hands clenched together so tight her knuckles were white. Mr. Prescott has brought a disturbing report to my attention, the Reverend said, his voice flat and hard. He tells me he saw you last night, consorting with the savages at the edge of town. The words hung in the air, an indictment and a death sentence all in one. Reverend, she whispered, her voice trembling. They were hungry. Hungry? The Reverend's voice exploded, laced with a fury that was almost theatrical. We are a God-fearing community, Miss Weston, surrounded by heathens. Your act was not charity, it was betrayal. You gave aid and comfort to the enemy. You endangered this entire town. He was pacing now, his shadow dancing on the walls like a demon. But Esther saw something else. In the corner of the room, near his desk, was a small, locked pantry. She'd always wondered what was in it, and just last week she'd seen him unlocking it late at night when he thought everyone was asleep. She'd caught a glimpse inside, sacks of flour, tins of coffee, smoked hams. He had a hoard. He was keeping food for himself while preaching to others about scarcity and fortitude. He wasn't afraid of her endangering the town. He was afraid of her giving away what he considered his. It was only bread, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. It was defiance, he thundered, slamming his fist on the desk, making her jump. It was a flagrant disregard for the order and decency we have built here. You have shown yourself to be sympathetic to the wilderness, to the godless element. He glanced at Prescott, who was enjoying the show, nodding like a puppet. Such corruption cannot be tolerated. The town council agrees. An example must be made. An example. Esther felt the floor tilt beneath her. She knew what that meant. Public humiliation, pain, a spectacle to remind everyone of the cost of compassion. Please, Reverend, she begged, her pride shattering into a million pieces. I meant no harm." "Your intentions are irrelevant," he said, his eyes as cold and dead as river stones. "The consequence of your action is what matters." He stood up, looming over her, a great black crow of a man. "You will be placed in the pillory for 3 days. You will reflect on your sin in the public eye, and the town will be reminded of the price of consorting with the enemy." The pillory stood in the center of town like a wooden skeleton, waiting. 2 men dragged her from the rectory. They didn't listen to her pleas. They forced her head and wrists through the rough-cut holes. The wood scraped her skin raw. Then the lock clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. Her ordeal had begun. The sun was a hammer. The heat was a fire. Her skin blistered within the first hour. Her arms, locked in that unforgiving embrace, went from numb to throbbing, with a pain so intense it made her want to scream. But she had no moisture in her mouth to make a sound. Thirst was a living thing, a monster clawing at her throat. The people of Providence walked by. Some glanced at her with a flicker of pity before looking away, afraid to be caught showing it. Others were more open. "There's the savage lover," a man sneered, spitting near her feet. Children, seeing the cruelty of their parents, felt brave. They threw pebbles that stung her face and arms. Martha Blackwood watched from her porch for a while, a look of grim satisfaction on her face, before turning and going back inside her cool, dark house. As dusk fell, the heat finally broke, but it was replaced by a biting cold that made her teeth chatter. The pain in her neck and back was a constant, grinding agony. She shivered, drifting in and out of a feverish haze. She saw her mother's face in the swirling dust. She heard her father calling her name on the wind. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Punished for one single act of kindness in a world that had never shown her any. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket, and it was smothering the last little spark of her will to live. The second day was a new kind of hell. The sun was a malevolent god, demanding her suffering. Her lips cracked and bled. The world swam in and out of focus. The taunts from the townspeople just became a meaningless buzz in the background. She focused on one thing, and one thing only: breathing in, breathing out. In the hottest part of the afternoon, when the square was nearly empty, she heard a soft footstep. She managed to lift her head, the effort sending waves of pain through her body. It was Abigail Hale, the blacksmith's widow. A quiet woman who mostly kept to herself. Abigail's face was a mask of sorrow and pity. She didn't say a word. She just glanced around, her eyes wide with fear, then quickly uncorked a small flask. She lifted it to Esther's lips. A few precious drops of cool water trickled into her mouth. It was gone in an instant, but it was like a resurrection. A tiny anchor of humanity in an ocean of cruelty. "God keep you, child," Abigail whispered, her voice shaky. Then, with another nervous look around, she hurried away, disappearing as quickly as she had come. That little bit of water, that one whispered blessing, was enough. It was a pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. It reminded her that she wasn't just a symbol of sin for them to mock. She was a person, and someone had seen that. She held on to the memory of that cool water like a treasure. They could lock her body in this wooden cage, but they couldn't have her soul. Not all of it. But Abigail wasn't the only one who had seen her act of kindness. Unseen, from a rocky ridge overlooking the town of Providence, Lonan watched. He had taken his wife and son to a safe place, a hidden canyon he knew of, and then he had come back. He couldn't explain why. A debt, an obligation, an honor that needed to be satisfied. He'd seen them drag Esther to that wooden cross. He'd watched her suffer through the first day. He watched her endure the second. He saw the cruelty. He saw the hatred. And then he saw the widow's small, risky act of mercy. A slow, cold fire started burning in his gut. The girl had shown his family honor when her people showed them nothing but contempt. And now, her own people were repaying that honor with torture. It was wrong. It was a deep imbalance in the world that had to be set right. A debt was owed. But it wasn't his debt to repay. It was a debt owed to her. He watched as the sun set on the second day, a bloody smear across the horizon. Then he turned his horse and rode. He rode hard through the night, the fire in his belly growing with every mile. He was going to get help, and they were going to come back. Justice was coming to Providence. The third day dawned, and Esther felt it as a vague shift from dark to light. She was barely there anymore. Her body was just a universe of pain, her mind a fog. She knew the sun was rising, she knew the heat was coming, but it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. She was pretty sure she was dying, and a part of her, a tired, broken part, didn't even care. The world had shrunk to the feeling of rough wood against her cheek and the fire in her blood. Late that afternoon, when the sun began to bleed across the sky, something changed. A hush fell over the town. The normal sounds of wagons and voices just stopped. It was replaced by a heavy, waiting silence. Even through her delirium, Esther felt it. She forced her eyes open, the light a physical blow, and she saw them. They came from the east, out of the setting sun. At first they were just dark specks on the horizon. Then they grew larger, resolving into men on horseback. A dozen of them, maybe more. They moved with a silent, fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Apache warriors. Their faces were like stone, their eyes fixed on the center of the town. They were led by an older man, his hair streaked with gray, his face a road map of a hard life. This was Kuruk, the chief, and riding beside him, his expression grim and unreadable, was Lonan. Kia was there too, just behind them, her gaze locked on the broken figure in the pillory. The town of Providence froze. Fear, stark and primal, washed through the square. Mr. Donovan, the storekeeper, scrambled back inside, fumbling for his shotgun. The men who'd been sneering at Esther moments before now backed away slowly, their faces pale. Reverend Blackwood came out of the rectory, his Bible clutched in his hand like a weapon. He straightened his shoulders, ready to be the shepherd protecting his flock from the wolves. But the riders didn't stop. They came on at a steady, deliberate pace, their horses' hooves making soft thuds in the dust. They flowed around the well, their formation perfect, their purpose clear. They were coming for the pillory. They stopped in a silent semicircle, surrounding Esther, trapping her in a ring of coiled power. The air was so thick with tension, you could have cut it with a knife. Reverend Blackwood stepped forward. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded, his voice trying for authority but only finding a tremor. "This is a peaceful, godly town. You have no business here." Kuruk didn't even look at him. His eyes, sharp and piercing, were fixed on Esther. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace and walked towards her. The whole town held its breath. The chief stopped right in front of her. He looked at her blistered face, her swollen, bloody wrists, the raw, chafed skin on her neck. He saw the pebbles on the ground around her feet. His face was grim, etched with a deep, profound disapproval. He said something in his own language, a short, sharp command. One of the other warriors dismounted. He had a heavy hatchet in his hand. He walked to the side of the pillory. The townspeople gasped. A woman screamed. They thought he was going to execute her right there. "In the name of God, stop!" the Reverend cried out. The warrior ignored him. With one single, powerful swing, he brought the hatchet down on the thick wooden lock bar. The wood exploded into splinters. The lock burst open. The warrior threw the top half of the pillory open, freeing her. But Esther had no strength left. Her body had been held up by the wooden frame for 3 days. Released, she just crumpled. She would have smashed her face on the ground, but Lonan moved like lightning. He caught her, swinging her limp body into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. In that same instant, Kia was there, pressing a water skin to Esther's lips. Cool, clean water. Esther drank, a low moan of pure relief escaping her throat. Kia then gently wiped her face with a damp cloth, her touch a miracle of tenderness. Only then did Kuruk turn his gaze to the Reverend and the terrified crowd cowering behind him. He began to speak. His voice was low, but it carried across the silent square with the weight of absolute authority. Lonan, still holding Esther, translated his father's words, his own voice tight with a rage he was barely holding in check. He asks, Lonan began, his eyes sweeping over the pale faces of the townsfolk. What kind of people are you? What God do you serve that teaches you to punish kindness with torture? Reverend Blackwood sputtered, She broke our laws. She gave aid to... He couldn't finish the sentence, not under Kuruk's stare. She gave food to a hungry woman and child. Lonan's voice cut him off, sharp as a razor. She showed honor when you showed none. The people understand honor. We understand debt. My wife and my son were starving. She fed them. A debt was created. We came to see how her people would honor her for this. And we find this. You have no honor. You treat one of your own like a diseased dog. A wave of shame washed over some of the faces in the crowd. They looked at each other, then at the ground. But others, like Walter Prescott, just stared back with pure, unadulterated hatred. Kuruk spoke again, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. Lonan translated, but this time he was looking down at Esther, who was slowly, weakly, coming back to herself in his arms. He says this is not a home for you, Lonan said, his voice losing its hard edge. A person's worth is not measured by the laws they obey, but by the strength of their spirit. Your spirit is strong, but it will die in this place. These people will crush it with their fear. Kuruk took a step closer, his eyes locked on Esther. Therefore a choice is offered, Lonan translated. You have no family here, no one to protect you. We will be your family. We will be your protection. Come with us. Live with the people. We will teach you our ways. You will have a home where kindness is not a crime. This is how we will repay the debt. The offer hung in the silent air. It was stunning, impossible. Leave with them? Go into the wilderness with savages? The entire town stared, their mouths hanging open. It was unthinkable. Esther, held safely in Lonan's arms, managed to lift her head. She looked past Kuruk. She looked at the crowd. She saw the Reverend's face, twisted with righteous fury. She saw Martha Blackwood's cold, dead eyes. She saw Walter Prescott's sneering grin. She saw fear and judgment on every single face. Then she looked back at the Apache. She saw Kia's gentle, worried eyes. She saw the quiet strength in Lonan, the man holding her as if she were precious. She saw the stern, unwavering integrity in the chief, Kuruk. Her future in Providence was a dead end, more servitude, more scorn, a slow, lonely death of the soul. With them, the future was a terrifying unknown, a leap into a world she couldn't even imagine. But it was a future. It was a choice. And for the first time in her life, she felt the power of making one for herself. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, but in the dead silence of the square, everyone heard it. Yes, she said, I will go. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The Reverend took a step forward, his mouth open to protest, but the silent, unblinking stare of a dozen warriors froze him where he stood. Kuruk gave a single, sharp nod. It was done. He turned and swung back onto his horse. Lonan, still carrying Esther, walked to his own horse. With an effortless show of strength, he settled her in front of him, her back against his chest, one strong arm holding her secure. her head lolled back against his shoulder. Her body finally gave up, surrendering to a deep, profound exhaustion. But she was safe. She was finally safe. Without a single backward glance, the Apache turned their horses and rode out of Providence. They left the townspeople standing in the dust, silenced by an act of justice and mercy they would never, ever understand. As the last of the town's buildings disappeared behind them, Esther finally fell into a deep, healing sleep, the rhythmic gait of the horse and the solid warmth of the man holding her, the only realities in a world that had just changed forever. But back in Providence, the silence was breaking. Walter Prescott watched them disappear into the sunset, and the look on his face wasn't fear. It was rage, pure, impotent rage. He turned to the stunned crowd. "Are we gonna let 'em get away with that?" He spat. "They come into our town, they threaten us, they steal our property." He pointed a shaking finger at the Reverend. "They stole your servant." The Reverend, pale and shaken, could only nod. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow. A few other men, their fear now turning into anger, started to mutter in agreement. They had been made to look weak. Their authority had been challenged. "I say we go after them," Prescott yelled, his voice getting louder, bolder. "I say we teach them a lesson. Show them what happens when they mess with the folk of Providence." He was looking for blood, and in the confused, angry, humiliated hearts of a half-dozen men, he found it. They were forming a posse. The ordeal wasn't over. It was just getting started. The journey into the high country was a dream to Esther. She drifted in and out of a gentle darkness, her world a patchwork of simple, kind sensations. The warmth of the sun, the steady rocking of the horse, the taste of clean water Kia would frequently bring to her lips. And always, the solid, unmoving presence of Lonan's arm around her waist. He was a silent guardian, a human shield against the world she had left behind. When she was awake, Kia was always there. She cleaned Esther's wounds with a gentle touch, applying a cool, soothing salve made of herbs that smelled of pine and earth. The pain began to recede, replaced by a deep, healing peace. They traveled for 2 days, moving deeper into a land of red rock canyons and high mesas, a place more beautiful and wild than anything Esther had ever imagined. The air itself felt different, clean, sharp, free. It was a world away from the dusty, judgmental cage of Providence. When they finally reached the Apache encampment, the rancheria, Esther was awake and aware, though still weak. It was nestled in a wide, grassy valley, a clear stream snaking through it like a silver ribbon. And it was nothing like the chaotic, savage place she had been taught to fear. It was a community. Domed dwellings, called wickiups, were scattered among the cottonwood trees. The air was alive with the sounds of a people living their lives. Children laughing, women talking as they worked, the distant nicker of horses. It was a place of purpose, of connection. Lonan carried her from his horse to his family's wickiup, a space that felt larger and warmer than the entire rectory. Kia helped her lie down on a soft bed of buffalo robes and gave her a bowl of warm, savory broth that felt like it was rekindling her soul from the inside out. For days, that was her life. Sleep, eat, and let her body and spirit mend under Kia's patient, watchful care. The little boy, Ashki, would sometimes peek in at her, his dark eyes wide with a solemn curiosity, before his mother would gently shoo him away. As her strength returned, she started to truly see the world she had entered. Life here wasn't governed by the frantic ticking of a clock or the tyrannical ringing of a church bell. It was governed by the seasons, by the needs of the people. They worked hard, yes, but there was a grace to it, a rhythm she had never known. She watched the women tan deer hides until they were as soft as velvet, their hands moving with a knowledge passed down through generations. She watched them weave intricate baskets and grind corn on stone. There was no idleness, but there was no sense of joyless, back-breaking toil either. There was dignity in the work. They were building a life, together, every day. She was a curiosity, of course, the pale-skinned woman the chief had brought back. But there was no malice in their stares, only questions, and Kia was her bridge into this new world. Using gestures and a growing list of shared words, Kia began to teach her. She showed Esther how to find edible roots in the streambed, how to sew with a sharp bone awl and sinew, how to grind mesquite beans into a sweet, nutty flour. Esther, who had only ever known the drudgery of scrubbing and polishing, found a deep, surprising satisfaction in learning these skills. Her hands, once soft and pale, grew calloused, stronger. Capable. Lonan remained a quiet, watchful presence. He was a hunter, and was often gone for days at a time, returning with deer or antelope. When he was in the camp, he would watch her, his intense gaze thoughtful and unreadable. He rarely spoke to her, not at first, but she felt his eyes on her, a silent promise of protection. Their bond didn't need words. It had been forged in fire and humiliation and rescue. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect. She respected his quiet strength, the deep well of honor that had made him return for her. And he, in turn, seemed to respect the resilience he had seen in her, the spirit that the town of Providence had tried and failed to break. Meanwhile, miles behind them, Prescott and his posse were tasting the dust of failure. They were townmen, used to streets and fences. The wilderness was an alien enemy. They had lost the trail on the first day, spending hours chasing a false track that led them to a dead-end canyon. Their water was running low, and their tempers were running high. The Reverend, unused to riding, was saddle-sore and miserable, his righteous anger souring into whiny complaint. "They are devils," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "They move like smoke." Prescott just spat on the ground, his frustration growing. "They're men, same as us. They bleed. We just need to find them." But they were clumsy, loud. They crashed through the undergrowth, scaring off game, leaving a trail a blind man could follow. And from the high ridges above, they were being watched. Kuruk had known they would come. He had anticipated their blind, clumsy rage. He had left a warrior behind, a young man named Taza, to track the trackers, and Taza reported their every move. Kuruk wasn't afraid. He was methodical. This wasn't a fight to be won with bullets. It was a lesson to be taught. He gathered Lonan and a few other warriors. They weren't preparing for a battle. They were preparing a classroom. They began to set a trap, not of ropes and snares, but of landscape and fear. They used their knowledge of the land, the narrow passes, the hidden springs, the places where a rock slide could be started with a single, well-placed push. They were going to dismantle this posse piece by piece, not by killing them, but by showing them how utterly, hopelessly out of their element they were. The chase was still on, but the hunters were about to become the hunted. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold, Esther sat with Kia outside the wickiup. She was mending a tear in one of Ashki's small buckskin shirts, her stitches now even and strong. "You are good with the needle now," Kia said, her English improving every day. Esther smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. It felt new and wonderful on her face. "You are a good teacher." Kia's expression turned serious. "Your old home, Providence. You do not miss it?" Esther looked down at the shirt. She thought of the dust, the cold silence, the Reverend's thunderous voice, the hate-filled faces. She thought of the pillory. "That was not my home," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It was a prison, my real home. It was lost a long time ago." She looked up and met Kia's kind gaze. I think I am finding it again. Here." Kia's face softened, and she placed a warm hand on Esther's arm. In that one simple touch, Esther felt the truth of it. This was family. A connection she thought had been buried forever with her parents. The next day, the lesson for the posse began. Prescott and his men found the trail again, or so they thought. It was too easy. The tracks were deep and clear, leading straight into a narrow, winding canyon. "We've got 'em!" Prescott crowed, his confidence renewed. "They're trapped." They spurred their tired horses forward, riding single file between the high rock walls. The Reverend looked up nervously. The walls seemed to press in on them, blotting out the sun. It was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly a sound from above, a single hawk's cry. It was a signal. High above them, on the canyon rim, Lonan gave a nod. Two warriors leaned against a carefully balanced scree of boulders. The rocks shifted, hesitated, and then gave way. It started as a trickle of pebbles, then a cascade, then a roar. A river of rock and dust poured down the canyon wall, not on top of them, but 100 yards ahead, completely blocking the path forward. Their horses panicked, rearing and screaming in the enclosed space. One man was thrown, his arm breaking with a sickening snap. They were sealed in. Then, from the canyon rim behind them, another hawk cry. More rocks tumbled down, sealing the entrance. They were in a box, a stone tomb. Panic set in. They were trapped. Their horses were useless. They had to abandon them and climb, scrambling over the treacherous rockfall that blocked their retreat. It took them hours. They were exhausted, bruised, and terrified. When they finally clawed their way out of the canyon, 2 of their horses were gone. And sitting on a rock, watching them, was a single unarmed Apache warrior. He just looked at them, then turned and vanished back into the wilderness. No words, no threats, just a silent message. "We control this land. You are children here. You are nothing." The posse was shaken. 2 men had had enough. They turned and started the long walk back to Providence, defeated. But Prescott was not a man who learned lessons. His fear just curdled into a deeper, more vicious hatred. There were 4 of them left, and they pushed on, now on foot, driven by his insane need for revenge. Back in the rancheria, life continued. Esther's transformation was nearly complete. The haunted, pale girl was gone forever. In her place was a strong young woman, her skin tanned by the sun, her body hardened by work, her eyes clear and confident. She could track a rabbit, find water in a dry wash, and could now speak the language of the people with a growing fluency. She had found more than a refuge. She had found a life. Her relationship with Lonan had also grown, deepening from a silent understanding into a quiet, comfortable companionship. They would walk by the stream in the evenings, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with a shared history and a slow-blooming affection. He would tell her the people's names for the stars. She would tell him about her parents, sharing the memories she had once held so close as painful secrets. In his quiet, steady presence, her old grief finally found a place to rest. The final confrontation came 3 days later. Prescott, the Reverend, and the 2 remaining men were stumbling through the wilderness, half-starved and delirious from thirst. They were following a stream, their last hope. As they rounded a bend, they saw it, a single wickiup nestled in a small clearing. A curl of smoke rose from its center. "We found them," Prescott hissed, pulling his pistol. "The main camp must be close." They crept forward, hiding in the brush, their guns ready. They saw a figure inside the wickiup, silhouetted by the fire. "On my signal," Prescott whispered, his eyes gleaming with madness. He was about to give the word when a voice spoke from directly behind them. "You are looking for someone?" They spun around. It was Kuruk. He stood there alone, unarmed, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was calm, impassive. Before they could react, Lonan and 3 other warriors emerged from the trees on their flanks, their arrows notched and aimed. They had been allowed to walk right into the heart of the ambush. The 2 townsmen immediately dropped their guns, their hands in the air. The fight was gone out of them. But the Reverend, in a fit of terror, raised his pistol and fired wildly. The shot went wide, hitting a tree. Before he could fire again, an arrow from Lonan's bow moved faster than the eye could see, thudding into the wooden stock of the Reverend's pistol, shattering it and sending the gun flying from his numb hand. Prescott was the last one. He spun, aiming his pistol at Kuruk, but he never fired. Esther stepped out of the wickiup. It was a decoy, a trap set just for them. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a cold, clear pity. "It's over, Mr. Prescott," she said, her voice steady. Her presence there, strong and alive, not the broken victim he remembered, seemed to shatter his resolve. He looked from her to the arrows aimed at his heart, and something inside him broke. He dropped his gun in the dirt. They didn't kill them. That wasn't the point. Justice wasn't about blood. It was about truth. Kuruk spoke, and Lonan translated. "You came here for vengeance," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing. "Because your pride was wounded. You value your pride more than honor, more than life." He looked at the Reverend, who was whimpering on the ground, cradling his stinging hand. "You speak of God, but you hoard food while others starve. You preach of mercy, but you practice torture. There is no spirit in you, only greed and fear." Then Kuruk's eyes fell on Prescott. "And you live on the pain of others. A man like you will always be alone. That is your prison." They took their remaining supplies, leaving them with just enough water for one day's walk. "The way back is long," Lonan said, his voice cold. "You should start walking." They turned their backs on them and melted back into the trees, leaving the four men alone in the vast, indifferent wilderness to confront their own pathetic souls. A year passed. The seasons turned. Esther stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, her home. The haunted girl from Providence was a distant memory. In her place was a woman. Her skin was the color of the warm earth, her hair braided thick and long, her hands strong and capable. She had found her family. Kia was her sister, Kuruk her father, Ashki her nephew, and Lonan, he was her future. He came and stood beside her, their shoulders touching. They didn't need to speak. They watched the sunset paint the canyons, the same canyons that had once seemed so alien and terrifying. Now they were the walls of her home. The wind that whispered through the pines no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like a promise. That one small act of kindness, an act born from her own lonely despair, a crime that had earned her condemnation and torture, had been a seed. And here, in this impossible place, tended by the honor of a people she never knew existed, it had been returned to her 100 times over. It had blossomed into the one thing she thought she had lost forever, a place to belong. What do you think? Was the town's punishment of Esther just, or was the Apache's response the true form of justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of when the darkness of the Old West met an even older form of light. Thanks for watching.